Hi, everyone. You ready to work for a few minutes? Crawl back inside these texts. Let's get back to where we were so we know what we're doing, if we ever knew what we were doing. We're studying Bible from the point of view of genealogy. Now, I can't underestimate how important that is, and I'm going to give you an example from worship today. We looked at the genealogies of Jesus last week to teach ourselves how to read genealogies in the Bible and to distance ourselves from how we understand genealogy today, because that just gets you into trouble. And what we saw is that genealogies have a social component to them, not a biological, and that they are intended to create family trees of non-related people so that they become a family, a community. And we saw that if you compare Luke and Matthew, they don't line up. I mean, they're using different people. And if you look at where these authors break their genealogies, that's the important thing, because that's where they lay their cards on the table and they say, I am concerned about. And Matthew tells us 4 times he's concerned about the mother of Jesus and working backwards through Bathsheba, Tamar, and Hagar. All right? That's interesting. And we also saw that his genealogy went from Adam to Jesus, from Matthew to Jesus. We flipped over to Luke and we saw he didn't care about the mothers. It doesn't bother him. He doesn't like the fact that in a genealogy, Joseph is the father of Jesus. And he tells you he doesn't like it. The supposed. Right? His genealogy goes from Adam, much bigger. So if genealogies are socially constructed communities that become blood related, and I mean here now blood genealogy, then Matthew's church is big, but it's not as inclusive as Luke's. Luke goes back to Adam. What these genealogies at the beginning of the gospel tradition also tell us, and this is where the rubber meets the road, friends, is that religion is about genealogy, about genealogical relationships. It's not metaphorical. These authors are both laying their cards on the table. You join this group, you're in a family. It's at the heart of the Christian tradition. When we say, we looked at this last week, when we're doing the Apostles' Creed in worship, I believe in God the Father, that's a genealogical statement, and Jesus Christ his Son. Well, if that were the big kicker of genealogy, that you had a 2 genealogy, who cares? Who cares? What matters is the speaker is grafted into it. It's our genealogy. And if you need any proof of it, today was a genealogical act. We took 2 kids that weren't in the Klan, and we said, you know what? We're putting you in the Klan. And we think it's so important, we're not going to ask. So we baptize infants in Presbyterianism. We don't wait till someone's an adult and says, you know, I really want to be in the Klan. Because we think God is more powerful than human choice. We call it providence. We call it election. So we baptize babies. But now you have to ask yourself, well, then what did we do this morning? And we sort of have a namby-pamby sort of ritual now. Presbyterianism is a little bit like 3-2 beer. But the fact of the matter is, we took 2 kids and we said, you are going to have a new genealogy and we're going to kill you right here in front of us. You are going to die in baptism. And in this act, we are going to raise you up and you're going to have a new genealogy. And by being grafted into a new genealogy, you can never, ever die again. Death is in your rearview mirror, little baby. You are grafted into the genealogy of Jesus. You are a child of God. You have died with Christ, and now you're rising with Christ. You can't die twice. That's a genealogical act. You see how Christianity is a very funky religion. That's not metaphorical in Christian tradition. That's a sacrament. And because you are transformed in that sacrament, oh my word, you get to have Thanksgiving with the dead in Christ. We call it the Eucharist. You feast with those who are grafted in the genealogy, who are caught between the times. The saints who are on the other side of the table, who with Jesus have supper with you once in a while. That's Christianity. That's Christianity. That's it. There ain't no more to it. It's a genealogical religion. Where did we get that? We got it from the Bible. We then segued back and we asked ourselves at the end of last week, what happens when a whole book is a genealogy? We looked at insertions into a genealogy, a little phrase here, a little phrase there. But what happens when you go back and you go to the book of Genesis, which is telling you, I am a genealogy? Well, is it really? I mean, it's got all these stories. So then the question becomes, if it's a genealogy, why the stories? Because what we really want in a genealogy is as close to Luke's as you can get. Take that little sticky wicket out about Joseph the father, and you got a nice genealogy that is, you have equilibrium. The world is at harmony. Father, it's patriarchal, father to son, and there's no storm-tossed sea. That's what we're after. That's it. Well, Genesis is your nightmare then, because it starts giving you genealogy, and it can't maintain it. It keeps dropping the ball. So narrative in the book of Genesis isn't good. It's a problem. You see what I'm saying to you? In the framework of our class, when you go at the Bible genealogically, which I really think we're invited to do, then you can't really romanticize these narratives. Because they're a little bit like Matthew saying Tamar and Hagar, but they get blown up. Because the problems are so much bigger. Follow me? So I have a handout today on the Abraham cycle, and I want to just quickly move through that with our lens, because it's easy to read the book of Genesis without the framework we're giving it, which pretty much ensures you misinterpret the book. So we get these big genealogies. In fact, Genesis 1 is outside of the genealogy. If you were going to really study, Genesis 1 was our text in worship today, right? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The first genealogy in the Bible is actually at the outset of the second creation story. These are the generations of the heavens and the earth. Chapter 2, verse 4. So what is chapter 1? Chapter 1 functions by itself in the Bible. It's outside of the genealogical structure. Genealogy begins with the second creation story, and boom, we're off and running. And the garden story isn't a story about Adam and Eve. It's not their story. It's the story about the heavens and the earth. The genealogy is about the heavens and the earth. And in that framework, it falls apart. And we have to move to narrative. So the narrative's a problem. It broke the genealogy. See how you read the book of Genesis? What is the problem? I don't want to look at that. I want to look at Abraham with you, because the rubber really starts meeting the road when we get to the Abraham cycle. And so that's where my handout is. So read this with me. And I've given you bigger print today. Come on, say thank you. You're welcome. The genealogy of Terah and the problem of infertility. Infertility will kill a genealogy. Boom. Huh? Now, these are the descendants of Terah. You could translate that. This is the genealogy of Terah. Terah was the father of Avram, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran was the father of Lot. Okay, here's an insertion. Haran died before his father Terah in the land of his birth, over in Iraq, right? Down on the Euphrates. Abraham and Nahor took wives. The name of Avram's wife was Sarai. They all get their names changed when it's important. Names matter. And the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah, Queenie. She was the daughter of Haran, the daughter of Milcah and Iscah. Now Sarah was, oh no, genealogy stops. You see, we get narrative because we can't move ahead. We're stuck. Now we need a long, complex story to solve this problem. So we can what? Get back to a genealogy. You see how the book works? So the stories about Abraham and Sarah and Hagar and Ishmael and Isaac are problematic stories. As long as it's in narrative form, it's not moving ahead. These are stories that are addressing this problem here of infertility, so we can get back to what we want. So let's see how this story kind of gets us moving. Now, the author overly complicates this by turning it into a problem with God. Now, the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land I will show you, and you're going to have a genealogy that's going to knock your socks off." Okay, now the deity's doubled down. The cards are on the table. Now this story is getting very wonky. Now God is in it. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Avram in a vision. Don't be afraid. I'm skipping. I'm giving you the Cliff's notes so we can get through it. Don't be afraid, Avram. I am your shield. Bet on me. Your reward, it's going to be really great. You know that big genealogy I promised you. But Abraham said, "Oh, Lord God, what are you going to give me? I don't have kids." Yada, 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 God promises. Yada, yada, yada. "And the heir of my house goes to Eliezer of Damascus." It's just nonsense. So we can't get to genealogy. There is none. Solutions. Now the text goes its own way. It takes a couple of turns here and there. And I'm calling this section Solutions for Infertility. And it kind of turns into Keystone Cops, as things often do with us in religion when we solve God's problems. Hagar and Ishmael, the first cycle. Ishmael, the word in Hebrew, Ishmael means God hears. Names matter in the Bible. So the hearing, God's hearing, is going to play a big motif in this cycle of stories. Now Sarah, Abraham's wife, bore him no children. Here we go. Get the punchline again. And now stay with the imagery, because this is loaded imagery in the Hebrew Bible. It is a slave tradition. What is salvation at the heart of the Hebrew Bible? Freedom from slavery. You are an enslaved people. And who is Yahweh? He's the slave freer, right? All of that has to be read in this side story. That's got to be on your mind. And this story's going south on us. And look at, there's puns in it. Who's the slave? The slave's an Egyptian. Who you saved? Who's your slave master? An Egyptian, Pharaoh. So this story has got my attention. Whose name was Hagar, and Sarah said to Abraham, you see, and now she's going theological on us. The Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go to my slave girl. I'm giving her to you. I'm giving you a surrogate. It may be I will get children from this. This is about her. This isn't about slave girl. Slave girl's fodder. Fodder in a bigger story for her. So Abraham, after 10 years, he takes her, sleeps with her, and she conceived, and she looked with contempt on her mistress. I think that's a status statement in Hebrew. A lot of ink has been shed over that little. I don't think that's a psychological statement. I think her status just went up. Why? She's got the genealogy. And we'll see in a minute, as far as Abraham's concerned, yes, she does. Let's call it quits. You see, we want to get back out of narrative. Then Sarai said to Abraham, oh, may the wrong done to me be on you. This gets kind of funky psychological. I gave my slave girl to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. May the Lord judge between me and you. But Abraham said to Sarah, your slave girl, you can have her. She's your property. Do with her whatever you want. Then Sarah dealt harshly with her, and she ran away. All right? That is, it's an Exodus story. She got out of the camp. She got free. But here comes God after her. This story's got a lot of it should make you lose a little bit of sleep. Then the angel of the Lord found her at a spring of water in the wilderness on the way to Shur. These are all way in the Negev. And he said, oh, Hagar, slave girl. Huh? This is the deity now of Sarai. Where the heck you going? Right? Where are you going? And she said, well, I'm running away from my mistress. And the angel said, go back to your slave labor. No underground freedom train for you. But I know this isn't really what you wanted to hear from me. So I'm going to give you a gift, sort of a gift. I will multiply your offspring. Now we're back into genealogical language. You may be a slave, but there's going to be a lot of you. I will multiply your offspring, that they cannot be counted. Now, how do you interpret that? The story's very ambiguous because now Hagar gets voice. It's always important for biblical characters. Now, and the angel, no, it's the angel of the Lord speaking. I'm sorry, she comes a little later. Now you have conceived, and you're going to bear this son. And I want you to name him, names matter, Ishmael. Why? Why? Because the Lord has given heed to your affliction. Really? You see how funky these are very unsettling stories. We're trying to get back to a genealogy, and as long as we're in narrative, these things are going sideways on us. Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abraham named his son, naming, of course, is always giving character, whom Hagar bore Ishmael. And how old is our hero? He's 86. And he's got a baby problem. He's got a baby problem, and he's 86. Keep reading. Are you following this with me? It's okay? Remember, we got to get back to stasis. We need a genealogy. So then the story switches gears altogether. And we turn our attention over to Sarah and Isaac. And Isaac means laughter. It's a complex little word in Hebrew. And it occurs in some other Semitic languages. And God said to Abram, as for Sarah, your wife, you shall not call her Sarai. See, they go through these name changes. Like baptism, by the way. Right? You really are supposed to get a Christian name after you die and rise with Christ. We don't do that. I lost my place. Oh, yeah. You shall not call her Sarai, but Sarah will be her name. And I will bless her. And moreover, here comes, I will give you a son by her. All right, back into the genealogical problem. And I will bless her, and she shall give rise to nations, and kings of people will come from her. He's 86. Then Abraham fell on his face and he Isaaced. That's what Isaac means in Hebrew. Tzachak. He tzachaked. Whoa. And while he's laughing, he said, can a child be born to a man who was a man who is 100? Oh, he got older. It's 12 years older now. Poor guy's clicking away. Can Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? And now we get his inner point of view on this mess. And Abraham said to God, oh, that Ishmael might live in my sight. That is, we've solved this problem. He can be my heir. He is primogenitor. He's firstborn. Right? God said, oh, no. But your wife Sarah will bear a son, and you'll name him Laughter. Because you laughed, you little rascal. The Lord appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre, and he sat at the entrance of his tent in the heat of day. And they said, where's your wife Sarah? These are kind of three divine beings. And he said, they're in the tent. And then one of them said, I will surely return to you in due season, and your wife will have a son. And Sarah, who's listening at the tent, and then our author reminds us, we've got the Walking Dead here, friends. Right? Are advanced in years, and it had ceased with Sarah after the manner of women. So she laughed. And that's she Isaaced. After I have grown old and my husband is old, shall I have pleasure? And the Lord dealt with Sarah as he said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had promised, and she had a kid in her old age. And Abraham gave the name of Laughter to him. Okay, so Abraham, he's got God hears and he's got Laughy. Laughy is a little more sinister. It's got sexual undercurrents to the word. You got to look that up in a lexicon. I'm not quite sure what this author has in mind with it, but it's a little weird. Now we go back to Hagar and Ishmael. He's grown up. He's weaned. And Abraham made a great feast on the day. Oh, it's Isaac, I'm sorry, that's weaned. So Ishmael's pretty old. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, now read this very carefully, whom she had borne to Abraham, and in the Hebrew it says plain with him, but he's Isaacine. It's the same word. It's the name Isaac, Sahak, and it's kind of an intense form of the Hebrew. Okay, so now we're into something. That name's got a broad meaning, and I think it has to do with sexual fertility somehow. But Sarah saw that, and the Hebrew's goofy here too. Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, and the Hebrew just says, he's mitzachekin in Hebrew. He's laughing. Okay? The Septuagint puts an object on it with her son Isaac. So which text is primary, we don't care. So she said to Abraham, whatever she saw, her thought is fertility and inheritance. Cast out the slave woman with her son, for the son of the slave woman will not inherit with my son. Whatever it is she saw, she don't want any of it, because it's a story that she doesn't like. Right? So we're in the world of genealogy here. So Abraham rose early in the morning. He took bread and skin and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder along with the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness by Beersheba. So it's the second time she's out there. These are probably doublet stories in the history of tradition, but they're functioning now as second time around. And when the water in the skin was gone, she cast the child under the bushes. He's dying. She don't want to watch it. Then she went and sat down opposite him a good way off, about the distance of a bow shot. For she said, I don't want to look upon the death of the child. I don't want to watch my boy die. And as she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and she wept. Weeping, sa'akin in Hebrew, that always gets God's attention. If you're in, weep. That's what prompts the Exodus. The Israelites, sa'ak. And wherever God was on vacation, God comes back. Bags packed. God can't take that. So she's weeping, and God Ishmaeled her. Right? You see, we're playing with names. God Ishmaeled her. He heard the voice of the boy. That is the meaning of his name. And the angel of the Lord called Hagar from heaven and said to her, what's your problem? Hagar, don't be afraid, for Ishmael, God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. We're moving along here, friends. Am I moving too fast? Are you with me? A little boring just reading the text, or heck, the text is what's interesting, isn't it? So what do we have? We have a Hagar Ishmael story. We have a Sarah Isaac story, and we come back to a Hagar Ishmael story that is in the present form of the book of Genesis. Hagar and Ishmael frame a Sarah Isaac story, which is sandwiched. Which one's primary? That's a literary question. But when someone gets double duty, I always think they paid somebody for that. That is, they're getting attention. Now it's the end of the story. Abraham's going to die. This is the length of Abraham's life, 175 years. Not bad, as long as you're active. I mean, if you're bedridden the last 75 years, it'd be a mess. Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age. An old man full of years, he was gathered to his people. Who shows up to bury him? See, we haven't decided the genealogy, really. Abraham wants Ishmael to be in the genealogy, and the deity seems to be picking second fiddle. His sons, Isaac and Ishmael, buried him in the cave of Machpelah, in the field of Ephron, son of Zohar, the Hittite, east of Mamre. The field that Abraham purchased from the Hittites, there Abraham was buried with his wife. We're still not back to the genealogy. Remember, we really have a genealogy disrupted by narrative because we can't move ahead. Now, what does this author tell us? These are the descendants of Ishmael. Here we go. Big stasis. Abraham's son, whom Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's slave girl, bore to him. And bam, we get a complete genealogy. Finally, take a breath, go get a cup of coffee. And I won't read the whole thing, but do you see that? These are the names of the sons of Ishmael, named in order of their birth. Nabaioth, the first son of Ishmael, Kedar, Abdiel, Mibsam, and so forth and so on. We get a full real stasis. So the line of Ishmael's cooking. It's back to business. We could end the story right here. Be done with it. The author comes back and says, well, these are the descendants of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Padam Aram, sister of Laban the Aramean. So now, can I get his genealogy? No! Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren. So our author wants to go on another segment on this disrupted genealogical scheme with Isaac, but has given a stasis with the firstborn Ishmael, both of whom are clearly in the genealogy and bury their father. Why? Why not just give us Ishmael? It's what Abraham wanted. So what that tells me is we got to come back. This author's going to play this trope out again. That is, gives us the little genealogy and takes it away. Can't move ahead. Why? Infertility again. Which is going to give rise to the Jacob cycle of stories. And the Jacob cycle of stories are going to address the problem of fertility 180 degrees different than the Sarah and Abraham stories. What happens if your progenitor is too potent and you get twins? Oh, whose genealogy is that going to be? You see? But when we read these narratives from the point of view of genealogical line, you can't blow off Ishmael. He's hardwired into this genealogy and never leaves it. So that just leaves the story so open-ended, even though our author is going to move on to Isaac. And we're going to have the same ambiguity next week with Esau, the firstborn of the twins. See? Firstborn, there's a trope in the book of Exodus. Never pick the first. Why? It's what everyone thinks you're going to pick. God likes the B team. Right? God likes the B team. Okay, are you with me? Thoughts before I move on with this? You got any? What are you thinking? Yes.
No, I just was wondering, when was the Old Testament written?
I got paid my whole life to answer that question, never did. These stories, in my opinion, are exilic, post-exilic stories where there is a problem of genealogical identity. That is, Israel loses its monarchy. When you have a monarch, you don't do this. You have the genealogy of the monarch, which simply tells you the monarch has power. But you don't get genealogies that include the people. They don't exist. Israel runs into a problem in the exile. Well, they actually run into this problem when the northern kingdom falls already. And the Judahites begin to identify as Israelites. They're actually not the same people at all. That is, if we did a different study of the book of Genesis, a method we call tradition history in my field, I could show you that Abraham and Jacob have nothing to do with each other. Nothing. Jacob is the eponymous ancestor of the northern kingdom. He is the cult founder of Bethel. It's all over the prophetic literature. Abraham lives in the south. He lives in the desert. He lives in Judah. But to be very honest with you, he's not very anchored in tradition. The first mention of Abraham outside of the Pentateuch is in the exile by the prophet Ezekiel. And the prophet Ezekiel uses this character to be inclusive. Diaspora and homeland Jews, we are one, even though you don't think so. How do I know? We're all from Abraham. You may not all think you're from Jacob, but you're all from Abraham. That is, he becomes an inclusive ancestor. He's bigger than Jacob. Matthew knows that. Matthew says that. Luke's dissatisfied with that, thinks it's too constraining, and he goes all the way to Adam. You see? These are statements about who can join the church. And the book of Genesis is saying, diaspora Jews, you're Jews. Homeland Jews, you're Jews. Sumerian Jews in the north, you're Jews. Elephantine Jews, southern Egypt, yeah, you're Jews. How can that be? You came from Abraham, didn't you? Yeah, you're in the genealogy. In the 60s, there was an identity crisis with the rise of the state of Israel over Ethiopian Jews. It's a genealogical problem. It had to be resolved by the rabbinate. Right down to this morning, pulling 2 kids into our genealogy so they can read the Apostles' Creed with the rest of us as a genealogical statement. Without that baptism, they couldn't. Couldn't. See? Yeah, so that's my hunch. I think this literature, it's got early material in it, but the Bible comes together, I think, in the exile, post-exilic period. We're beginning to see that it's even later. I just reviewed a book from my field on 2 authors who really think the Septuagint's older than the Masoretic text. The Septuagint is the Greek version, and the Masoretic text is the Hebrew version. That goes against what we thought. So the books, how much of the Bible exists when the New Testament's written? It's hard to say. It looks like you have Torah, and you have the Psalms, but I don't know how much of the writings or a lot of the prophetic literature is functioning for New Testament authors as scripture. So this is kind of late literature. And what pulls this stuff in? Genealogy, who's in? Who can claim the power of God? And who can't? I find it quite interesting. Yeah.
So, I've always understood that God didn't allow Sarah to have a child first. What I've heard is that God didn't allow Sarah to have a child first when he could have, if he wanted to. But he allowed Ishmael to be born, who would then found the religion of Islam. I'm sure I don't have this exactly right, and that would make the people that follow Islam and the rest of us feel connected.
You are bringing up a very interesting thing, and let me flip the way you've done that. This is what happens in book religions. Christians say they're Jews. Right? That's what Paul's fighting about, all through Paul's letters. He says, I'm a Jew. I am Ivrit, I'm Hebrew. And he tells the Galatians, you're in the genealogy too. Right? Why? What's Paul's argument? The book of Galatians. He said, you're in it because you're children of Abraham. In Greek, you are sperma Avraham. He's making Matthew's argument. That's an early Pauline argument. He blows that argument out and gets a bigger argument at the end of his career when he's writing Romans, a late book. He goes, no, maybe that's not completely true, because when I really think about Jesus, Jesus isn't just the fulfillment of Abraham, the inclusive ancestor. Jesus is a new Adam, he tells the Romans. Boom, Luke's genealogy. Right? Luke and Paul are very closely related in the literature. Now that's a major move in terms of opening up the church doors. So let me get back to your issue. Book religions in the West, there are about 5 that are related, but there's 3 we think about. There's Judaism, and Christianity piggybacks Judaism. That is, reads the same sacred text, but interprets it slightly differently as fulfilled messianism. Whereas if you look at the Seder, the 4th cup, it hasn't happened yet. So it's eschatological on that. So a colleague of mine in Ohio, he wrote a book just at the end of his career. It only came out a year or 2 ago. He doesn't think actually to call Matthew Christian is a little anachronistic, because what Matthew is arguing is really within the framework of Judaism. It's a Jewish debate about messianism, of which there were tons. But now that gets worked out in good and bad ways in the history of tradition, which gives rise to anti-Semitism. Those Jews don't read the Bible right, which then gives rise to, well, read our history. 600, Muhammad lives with Jews and kind of likes what he's hearing. Read the Quran, it's filled with Jewish stories. And he wants to be in the genealogy, but he doesn't want to be a Christian and he doesn't want to be Jewish. So he reads our ancestral genealogy and he says, well, it's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer. The stable genealogy that moves into the wilderness, Hagar and Ishmael, is us. Now we're grafted into the genealogy. Islam is tied to Judaism. And of course, he's now 600 years into Christianity, and he makes the same move with the New Testament. Book religions piggyback each other, which creates conflict. It's an exegetical problem. So
Question. I've got a mic, so why not?
Yeah, why
can
not?
I get a question in? So on this issue of Ishmael being part of the genealogy, and his story is, and thanks for that, I hadn't focused on that before. But isn't there some hints that Ishmael's descendants are the Ites, the Amalekites and the like, and a number of groups that God doesn't seem to favor?
Yeah, no, not the Amalekites. The writer tells you about Ishmael, and the writer loves the Ishmaelites. They are wilderness people, and they're tough as nails. Now, you have to remember, the Hebrew Bible, the core salvation story, and we're in it in Lent, is can you take the wilderness or can't you? And if you can't take the wilderness, you're not worth much. Anyone can be religious when you're, driving through McDonald's. Can you live in the wilderness? The salvation story of Israel is surviving the wilderness. It's not just liberation from slavery. And what do they say about this clan? This clan we think is tougher than us. Yeah. No, but they are tracking their own way. Because our author wants to go another way, but our author does not detach. Same thing's going to happen next week with Esau. And then you get varieties of responses to this in the Hebrew Bible, because not one person's writing this book. Some authors, this is more next week, hate Esau. And other authors think he's the cat's meow. So the Bible itself is conflicted on who's in the genealogy and why. There's debates about the nature of the community. So I just gave you Islamic reading, right? I referenced Paul's reading. Paul uses Abraham to expand the genealogy so that there's Jewish Christians. I think we're running out of time, aren't we? I want to say one more thing. This goes on today. Oh, my career has changed so much over the years and how I read this material. And I started my career, I did my PhD at Columbia. But as you may or may not know, Columbia and Jewish Theological Seminary and Union Seminary, they're all just one big conglomerate on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And I was the TA for Phyllis Tribble. Phyllis Tribble, you may not know, in my early career, she's very, very famous, very tough woman, early feminist, rereading these ancestral stories to get women more prominently read so that they're not just second fiddle. Succeeded. Toward the end of my PhD residency, that issue of genealogy got very funky. Why? Because a debate emerged within feminism. You know, I'm saying this sounds a little too disparaging, but I just got to get the point across and we're done. Phyllis, why are you focusing on Sarah when the real story is Hagar? Now, who said that to her? African American women. You want to be a feminist? Let's go to the slave. Let's talk about the slave. And there was a student at the time, Dolores Williams. She was working in theology, I think with James Cone. But she wrote a dissertation. I think I put it on. Yes, Sisters in the Wilderness, which is sort of a manifesto for a new form of Christian feminism that's anchored in black women. Now, what was the argument? You want to read the Abraham cycle? Well, then, read it where it matters. Go to the slave. Quit reading the edges of the people eating good dinners. And that opened up this literature. But my point to you is this literature, because it's narrative and it's trying to deal with genealogy, is open to revision through time. As we change, you can read this material and one generation sees one thing and another generation sees another thing, and that makes this genealogical literature so incredibly dynamic. It's multivalent, and its meaning shifts depending on our lived experience. So you have to own this literature in your moment. You got to look around. What are the issues? Who needs to enter this genealogy more strongly? How would it change me? See that? Isn't that interesting? Totally changed the way I taught this from the beginning of my career to the end of my career. But we got to quit.
We have one more question.
Yes.
Can I ask a question? And it has to do what you just touched on. How does this affect me?
Yeah.
And Lent is a mess in most churches. I'm just going to say that because the way it's written is not necessarily what people need to have happen. Like, do I need a crown of thorns and blood running down? No, I don't. So I try to figure out each year, what do I need for Lent? And this image, this metaphor of being in the wilderness, I like a lot because
Yeah.
everyone has this mixed up about Lent too.
Yep.
You don't give up something, you add something, and it should cost you something.
Yes.
So, is that what this imagery of the wilderness is about?
Yes.
Okay.
Lent is the wilderness. And the wilderness is unbelievably important to Christian tradition. Can you strip yourself of all the things that you think you need and still self-identify in the genealogy with it? Are you a child of God when you bring nothing? And if you can get to that point in Lent, there's really two Lents. Advent is also meant to be a Lent. Then you're ready for Easter. Then you're ready. Now you know what Easter has done for you, you see. Yeah, the liturgical year is finally crafted spiritually. It's worth tracking. The Christian calendar matters. Yeah, we got to quit. It's late. It's late. You have brunch.
Can I pray us out, Tom?
Huh?
Can I pray us out?
Yes.
All right. God, who created heaven and earth and the ancestors, we give you thanks. We have gratitude for the ancestors that are known in our own heritage and for the ancestors of faith who walked before us. This Lent, as we spend time in the wilderness, keep piquing us with curiosity for the genealogy, for who you are and who you call us to be. And let God's children say, Amen. Thank you, Tom.
You're welcome. Yeah, just a thing to walk home with. Biblical writers think that Hagar is the pre-Moses Moses. Everything she does in the wilderness and every divine experience she has is repeated by Moses. So they're hardwiring her into the heart of salvation.